He called the horse worthless, nothing but a burden to be cast aside. But when an orphan girl placed her trembling hand on its muzzle, something impossible began. A fragile trust born in the frost. 14 days, a raging blizzard, and a test no one believed she could win. Stay until the end, because this isn't just about saving a horse. It's about proving that what the world discards can rise again. The valley was still half asleep when the first pale ribbons of light stretched across the Absaroka Mountains. Frost clung to the brittle grass like crystals, and each breath from the horses rose in clouds that shimmered and vanished into the dawn. Emma Cole stood at the edge of the corral, her hands tucked into the sleeves of a wool coat too large for her, the collar frayed where someone else's shoulders had worn it thin, long before it reached hers. Grant Whitaker, owner of Whitaker Ridge, leaned against the fence with the air of a man already exhausted by the day. His boots, polished though dust clung stubbornly to them, pressed into the frozen ground. His eyes, sharp, calculating, pale as the sky just before snow, were fixed on the chestnut mare limping unevenly across the pen. "This lame horse is worth nothing," he said flatly, the kind of pronouncement that didn't invite an answer. Cal Boone, the ranch foreman, spat into the frost and nodded. "Better off put down, boss. No sense in throwing hay at a cripple." His voice carried a kind of finality, rough like gravel, as if he had seen 100 animals judged the same way and didn't expect anyone to argue. But Emma did not look away. The mare's coat caught the thin light and glowed a muted bronze, her gait uneven, but her head still lifted with a stubborn dignity. There was something in the eyes, large, dark, ringed with the fatigue of pain but still alive, that reached straight into the hollow place inside Emma. She thought of her mother, long gone now, who used to say, "Some lives are like winter branches, brittle to the touch, but the first to catch light when morning comes." Emma had learned early that not everything broken was useless. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of hay and iron. Juniper, she did not know yet that she would call the horse this name, shifted her weight and winced. The sound was small, a mere scuff on frozen dirt, but Emma heard it the way a violin string hears the bow, vibrating, undeniable. "Best haul her out of here before she drags the rest of the stock down with her," Cal muttered. His hand was already at the gate latch. Emma's voice came out softer than she intended, but it carried in the brittle air. "She's not nothing." Grant turned his head, not quickly, but as if something in her tone had surprised him. His expression was unreadable, the lined face of a man carved by years of droughts, debts, and too many promises unkept. "And what would you know about it, girl?" he asked. Not cruel, not kind, just flat, like the surface of a frozen pond. Emma swallowed, the taste of cold iron in her throat. "I know what it's like when no one thinks you're worth keeping." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Only the distant rumble of cattle, shifting in their pens, and the restless stamping of hooves in the barn. Cal looked from one to the other, shaking his head, muttering something about wasted time. But Emma held her ground. The mare's eyes found hers across the corral, two creatures cornered by circumstance, both trying not to flinch. Grant pushed away from the fence at last. "You want to feed her, water her, waste your hours on her? That's your business. But don't think it'll change the numbers." He brushed frost off his gloves, his breath a cloud dissolving into the light. "This ranch doesn't run on hope." He walked away, his figure shrinking into the haze where the valley met the rising sun. Cal followed, boots crunching against the frost, leaving Emma alone by the fence. She let her hand slip through the slats, palm open. Empty. The chestnut mare hesitated, ears flicking back, then forward. Slowly, painfully, she stepped closer, the limp pronounced, but her gaze steady. Her warm breath touched Emma's skin, carrying the faint scent of hay and something older, something untamed. Emma whispered, almost to herself, "You're not nothing, not to me." The mare exhaled, a sound almost like a sigh, and lowered her head until her muzzle brushed the girl's fingers. It was the smallest gesture, but in the quiet valley, it felt like the world tilting. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of that fragile trust. The day had only begun, yet she already knew. Nothing would be the same after this touch. "Good girl," she murmured, her voice catching. "I see you." And the horse, against all odds, stayed still. The mare stayed still. For a moment, it felt like the whole valley was holding its breath, waiting to see if the fragile thread between them would snap. Emma let her hand remain, unmoving, her palm open as if she had nothing else in the world to offer. The warmth of the horse's breath seeped into her fingers, thawing something in her chest that had been cold for years. She drew in a slow breath, steadying herself, then stepped back from the fence before the animal could spook. Trust had to be earned in increments, like sunrise spreading over frost. Inside the barn, the air was thick with the scent of hay and leather, mingled with the sharper edge of manure and oil from the tack room. Emma pushed open the heavy door, her shoulders straining under the weight, and slipped into the dim interior. Dust motes spun in beams of light, knifing through the boards. She reached into a bin and pulled out a handful of alfalfa, the stems greenish and sharp, fragrant even in the chill. It wasn't much, but it was sweeter than the coarse prairie grass Grant had grudgingly allotted for stock feed. Horses noticed small mercies. She returned to the corral, quietly, careful with her steps. The mare lifted her head, ears twitching. Emma stopped a few feet away, raising her hand slowly so the animal could see, could smell. "Easy," she whispered, though the word was more prayer than command. The horse hesitated, then took one uneven step forward. Her limp was pronounced, each movement weighted with pain, but her eyes never left Emma's. Slowly, carefully, the muzzle reached the hay. The crunching sound was soft, intimate, like someone tearing paper in a silent room. Emma's chest tightened with relief. It was the smallest victory, but victories like this could build into something larger. If only time and patience were granted. She had so few things she could control in her life. But this moment belonged to her alone. The sound of boots crunching behind her made her stiffen. Cal Boone stood at the fence, arms crossed, chewing on a toothpick. His shadow fell long across the ground. "Feeding her ain't gonna change a thing," he said, voice flat with disdain. "Boss made his call. You'd do better shoveling stalls than wasting your hours." Emma didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the horse, on the way the chestnut lips gently lifted hay from her palm. "Maybe," she answered softly. "But at least she knows someone cares." Cal snorted, spat into the dirt, and walked off. The echo of his footsteps faded into the barn, leaving Emma with the horse and the sound of steady chewing. The dismissal didn't sting as much as it once would have. Words like his had filled her life since her parents' accident, reminders that she was just a mouth to feed, a hand to hire out. But the horse didn't care about reputations or past mistakes. The horse only cared about presence, patience, and the quiet offering of kindness. When the hay was gone, the mare lifted her head, brushing Emma's palm with her whiskers, as if asking for more. Emma smiled, despite herself. "Tomorrow," she said. "We'll try again tomorrow." The day pressed on with its chores, pitchforks scraping straw, the squeak of gates, the weight of water buckets carried across frozen ground. Emma moved through each task with the image of the horse fixed in her mind. Each time she bent to scoop manure, each time she wrestled with a bale of hay, she thought of those dark eyes meeting hers, steady and unflinching. By late afternoon, the sky turned the color of pewter, heavy with the promise of snow. Emma lingered by the corral once more, her hands raw and chapped from the day's work. She didn't have more alfalfa to offer, but she stood there anyway, letting her presence be the gift. The mare moved closer this time without hesitation, her limp still there but less guarded. Emma reached out, brushing a strand of tangled mane from the horse's forehead. The touch was tentative, feather-light, yet it carried the weight of everything Emma longed to give. Safety, belonging, a reason to keep breathing. The cold deepened, biting through her thin coat, but she didn't move away. The horse's body radiated warmth, a living flame against the encroaching dusk. Emma whispered, "I'll fight for you." She didn't even realize she'd spoken until the mare exhaled sharply, as though answering. A single snowflake drifted down, melting on Emma's sleeve. The first of the season. She looked at it, then back at the horse, and felt an almost reckless surge of courage. Tomorrow, she would go to Grant. She would ask for time. Just a sliver of it, a chance to prove that broken things could still heal. The mare lowered her head once more, pressing gently against Emma's hand, as if sealing the silent pact. The first snow of the season lay thin across the valley the next morning, a fragile sheet that cracked under boots and dissolved in the sun's brief warmth. Emma rose before the ranch stirred, her breath fogging in the air of the bunkhouse, her decision heavy but unshakable. She had promised herself in the fading light of yesterday that she would speak to Grant Whitaker, and now there was no turning back. She rehearsed her words in silence as she buttoned her coat, phrases that sounded strong in her head, but felt fragile on her tongue. Grant was in the main barn, his broad back turned as he checked the ledgers laid out on a makeshift desk balanced atop a hay bale. The barn smelled of oil and grain, a working man's cathedral. He did not glance up when Emma approached, but his voice carried, low and steady. "You're up early." Emma clasped her hands to still their trembling. "Mr. Whitaker," she began, her voice catching slightly, "I want to ask you for something. About the chestnut mare." At that, he did look up, gray eyes narrowing like shutters against wind. "The lame one?" "Yes, sir. I believe she can recover, if you give me time." Emma forced herself to stand straight, to meet his gaze even as her throat tightened. 2 weeks, 14 days. Let me prove she's not worthless." Grant leaned back, folding his arms. The silence stretched so long that Emma could hear the drip of melted snow from the rafters. Then he said, 2 weeks won't fix what's broken." "Maybe not," Emma admitted, "but 2 weeks can show if healing's possible. Please, I'll keep up with every other chore. You won't lose anything by letting me try." Cal Boone had entered during her plea, his heavy boots striking the boards. He barked a short laugh. "Boss, she's dreaming. Hay prices are already eating us alive. You gonna waste more feed just so the girl can play nurse?" Emma's cheeks burned, but before she could answer, Avery Whitaker appeared at the barn door. Her dark hair was tucked beneath a knit cap, her eyes clear despite the fatigue that came from too many hours caring for stock. "Dad," she said quietly, "let her try. You always said the ranch teaches more than books. If she fails, she'll learn that lesson. And if she's right." Her voice trailed, but the faintest smile touched her lips. Grant studied his daughter, then turned back to Emma. 14 days, he said finally. "If I see no change, the mare is gone. And Emma, your chores won't wait while you play healer. Understood?" Emma nodded quickly, relief flooding her so hard her knees almost buckled. "Yes, sir. Thank you." Cal muttered something under his breath, but Grant's sharp glance silenced him. The foreman retreated to the tack room, leaving the barn's tension hanging like smoke. Emma left with her heart racing, the promise burning inside her like a coal. The day stretched before her full of tasks, mending fences, breaking ice on water troughs, shoveling stalls. Each job weighed on her arms, yet her mind spun only around the mare. 2 weeks. 14 days to turn pity into proof. That night, as lantern light flickered across the walls of the bunkhouse, Emma whispered the timeline aloud, as if saying it could make it real. 2 weeks. She pulled her thin blanket higher, the wind rattling loose boards. In her dreams, the mare's eyes appeared again, dark pools steady and unwavering, as if daring her not to fail. Morning came sharp and bright. The valley glittered with ice, the river steaming faintly where currents broke through the crust. Emma carried a bucket of warm mash she had begged from the cook, her arms aching, her breath short. Juniper stood waiting in the corral, ears pricked, limping forward when she saw the girl. It was as though the horse already knew the bargain struck on her behalf. Emma set the bucket down, the mare lowering her head to eat, steam rising from the warm mixture. Watching her, Emma whispered, "We've got 14 days, girl. Just 14. The horse lifted her head, her whiskered muzzle dusted with mash, and exhaled a warm breath across Emma's chilled face. It was no answer, but Emma took it as one anyway. For the first time since she had stepped onto this ranch, Emma felt as though she belonged, not to the buildings or the ledger books, but to a promise, to a creature the world had already dismissed. In the silence of the frosted morning, a pact had been made, and both of them would carry it. In the silence of the frosted morning, a pact had been made, and both of them would carry it. Emma repeated those words to herself as she walked toward the river with the mare the following afternoon, the rope slack between them, the chestnut limping but willing. The sun was pale, a weak coin pressed against the vast Montana sky. Snowmelt trickled down from the slopes, feeding the Yellowstone into a silver ribbon that steamed where the cold wind met its surface. Emma had always found the river intimidating, its relentless current, its indifference, but today it felt like a partner in the fragile promise she had made. She stopped at the river's edge, boots sinking slightly into the damp sand, and turned to the mare. "It'll be cold," she murmured. "But it'll help." Juniper flared her nostrils, stamping her good foreleg, uncertain. Emma reached up, pressed her palm to the mare's forehead, and breathed slowly. In, out. She whispered the counts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Not just for herself, but for the horse, as if rhythm could anchor them both. After a long pause, Juniper took one halting step forward. The water lapped at her hoof, icy enough that Emma felt her own teeth chatter in sympathy. The sound of an approaching truck broke the stillness. Emma turned, expecting Cal's mocking drawl, but instead saw Lyle Yazzie climb down from the driver's seat. Tall, broad-shouldered, his braids tucked beneath a wool cap, Lyle moved with the deliberate care of someone who knew animals remembered every gesture. "You trying to drown her, girl?" he asked, voice calm but edged with concern. Emma shook her head quickly. "No, I thought the cold water might help. My mother used to talk about it." Lyle squatted, studying the mare's swollen tendon with eyes that seemed to weigh more than bone and sinew. "You're not wrong. Cold water reduces heat, keeps the fibers from tearing further." He ran a hand along the hoof, frowning. "But her gait's off because her balance is off. Mismatched shoeing. Whoever last trimmed her didn't respect her angle. That's why the injury lingered." Emma bit her lip. "Can it be fixed?" "Not fixed," Lyle said, standing with a grunt, "but adjusted. Balanced. Takes patience." He walked back to his truck, returned with a small anvil, nails, and a pair of glue-on shoes. The metallic clink echoed across the riverbank, sharp and cold. Juniper shied instantly, eyes rolling white. Emma grabbed the rope, murmuring reassurance, pressing her forehead to the mare's again. "Breathe with me. Just breathe." The mare's trembling slowed. Emma matched each exhale, steady as a heartbeat. Lyle watched quietly, then nodded. "She trusts you. That's rare." They worked together in the waning light. Lyle trimmed carefully, explaining angles and weight distribution, his voice steady and patient. Emma held the mare's head, whispering stories as distraction, about the stars her mother used to name, about the songs she hummed when she braided Emma's hair. The mare's ears flicked toward her, grounding in the familiar cadence. When Lyle tapped the shoe into place, the sound rang sharp as a bell, but Juniper didn't bolt. She pressed her muzzle into Emma's shoulder instead, breathing deep. By the time they finished, the sky had darkened into indigo, the river a ribbon of ink. Lyle packed his tools, glancing at Emma. 2 weeks isn't long, he said, but maybe long enough to see if she wants to heal. Emma stroked the mare's neck, her fingers chilled and raw. "She wants to," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking for the horse or herself. They led Juniper back toward the ranch, their footsteps crunching over the frosted ground. In the distance, lights flickered on in the bunkhouse, yellow squares of warmth against the dark. Emma tightened her grip on the rope, feeling the mare's head brush lightly against her arm as they walked. Each small touch, each breath shared, felt like a thread pulling them closer into something neither of them had known how to ask for. Trust. At the barn, Cal's voice cut through the night. "So, this is where the hay's going," he sneered, leaning against the doorframe. His eyes darted to the new shoes on the mare. "Nice work. I'm sure the boss'll be thrilled you're burning through nails and feet on a lost cause." Emma's stomach tightened, but she kept her tone even. "It's not a lost cause." Cal smirked, stepping into the lamplight. "Hope doesn't pay the bills, girl. Neither does stubbornness." He spat into the straw, then walked away, leaving the smell of tobacco and contempt behind. Emma exhaled, steadying herself. She turned to Juniper, brushing her mane aside. "Don't listen to him," she whispered. The mare snorted softly, ears flicking toward Emma's voice. The night grew still again, broken only by the sound of horses shifting in their stalls and the distant rush of the river. Emma leaned her forehead to the mare's, repeating the rhythm she had begun at the water's edge. 1, 2, 3, 4. This time the horse's breath matched hers, rising and falling together. For the first time, Emma felt the pact was no longer hers alone to carry. The horse had accepted it too. The morning after the river and iron, Emma woke with a strange lightness, as though some part of her had finally been heard. The bunkhouse was quiet, frost curling along the small window panes. She sat up, pulled on her boots, and thought of the way Juniper's breath had matched hers. Steady and sure. That rhythm stayed with her as she carried buckets, broke ice on troughs, and stacked feed. Each chore felt less like drudgery and more like a step in a long prayer. But the rhythm faltered when she entered the main barn and saw Grant Whitaker bent over his desk, the ledger spread open like a wound. His shoulders sagged in a way she had never seen before, not even when he scolded workers or barked at Cal for mistakes. The numbers on the page told their story in red ink, and even from across the room, Emma could sense the weight of it pressing him down. "Bank's coming sooner than I hoped," Grant muttered, mostly to himself, but loud enough that the words floated into the rafters. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, his breath heavy. "Feed bills, vet bills, winter supplies. It doesn't add up." Cal appeared at his side like a shadow. "Told you, boss. That mare's another drain. Should have cut her loose day one." Grant didn't reply. He closed the ledger, his jaw tight, and looked out through the open barn doors at the pale expanse of pasture. For a moment, his eyes softened, as if he saw something far away, perhaps a younger version of himself, when ranching was more dream than debt. Then the hardness returned. "We may need to sell stock," he said flatly. "Cows, maybe even breeding horses. Otherwise, winter eats us alive." Emma froze in place, her arms around a bucket of grain that suddenly felt too heavy. She had known money was tight. Everyone on the ranch had felt it in the thinning feed and the way Grant skipped repairs that used to be routine. But hearing it said out loud, hearing the possibility of selling the very animals that gave the ranch its pulse, sent a shiver down her spine. When Cal left, Grant finally noticed her standing there. His expression sharpened. "Don't eavesdrop, girl." "I wasn't," Emma said quickly, though she knew she had been. Her voice trembled. I heard about the bank." Grant studied her for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. Then he sighed, the sound heavy as the barn doors in the wind. "This place doesn't run on kindness. Remember that." Emma wanted to speak, wanted to say that maybe kindness was the only thing keeping it alive. But the words tangled in her throat, and she slipped away instead, the grain still cradled in her arms. That evening, after the chores were done and the lanterns flickered low, Emma found Avery near the tack room, repairing a bridle with hands both steady and tired. The leather smelled of oil, her hair tucked back in a careless braid. Avery looked up, reading Emma's face without a word. "You heard him," Emma whispered. Avery nodded slowly. "I've been hearing him for years. Numbers, numbers, always numbers." She threaded the strap through the buckle, her movements precise. "He wasn't always like this?" Emma hesitated, then drew from her pocket a folded photograph she had carried for years, edges frayed, colors faded. It showed her mother younger, standing beside a horse at the ranch long ago, Emma a toddler at her knee. "My mom worked here," Emma said softly, "before she married my dad. She used to tell me stories about this barn, about how Mr. Whitaker gave her a chance when she had nothing. This place, it's the only home I've ever known." Avery set the bridle aside, eyes glistening in the dim light. "You should tell him." Emma shook her head. "He wouldn't care. Not now. Not with everything falling apart." For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet creak of the barn settling in the cold. Then Avery reached across, squeezing Emma's hand. "He cares more than he shows. But he's drowning, Emma. Sometimes drowning men push away the very hands that could save them." Later, in the quiet of the corral, Emma leaned against Juniper's side, feeling the mare's warmth seep into her chilled bones. The stars glittered above like shards of broken glass scattered across velvet. She whispered, "He doesn't remember what this place used to mean. But I do. And you will too." The mare shifted, resting her head lightly against Emma's shoulder, as if agreeing. Yet the shadow of debt loomed, darker than the mountains. Emma knew the clock on her promise wasn't the only one ticking. Winter was coming fast, and with it the threat of losing everything, not just Juniper, but the fragile home she had built out of scraps of memory and stubborn hope. The storm rolled down from the mountains without warning, a gray wall of wind and snow that swallowed the valley whole. Morning had been sharp, but clear, the kind of brittle cold that cracked water troughs, but let chores pass in sunlight. By mid-afternoon, the sky lowered into a brooding ceiling, and the air smelled of iron, the way it did before lightning. Then came the howl, first a murmur through the pines, then a roar that bent fence posts and sent the cattle pressing tight against one another. Emma had just finished mucking stalls when Cal's voice rose above the wind. "Gates blown wide by the east pasture." His words were half torn away by the gale. Men scattered to hammerboards and lash tarps. Snowflakes as large as coins slashed sideways, stinging exposed skin like needles. Emma's first thought was of Juniper. She bolted for the corral, heart hammering. The gate swayed loose, the rope latch dangling, snow already drifting knee-deep inside. The pen was empty. Her breath caught in her throat. She called the mare's name, though she had never been sure the horse truly knew it. The only answer was the shriek of wind. She climbed the fence, scanning the white blur beyond. Hoof prints cut across the pasture, already filling with snow. Without thinking, she grabbed a lantern, pulled her scarf tight, and plunged after them. The storm swallowed her instantly. Snow blinded, wrapping the world in a shifting veil. Each step was a battle, boots sinking, lungs burning. The tracks veered toward the river flats where the land dipped, and currents sometimes carved thin ice. Panic pressed hot in Emma's chest. She forced herself onward, whispering aloud to steady her pulse. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rhythm she had shared with Juniper kept her feet moving through the chaos. Time blurred. It could have been minutes or hours before she heard it, the thin, desperate cry of a horse. She stumbled toward the sound, lantern light flickering wildly. And there she was, Juniper, floundering at the edge of a frozen slough, one leg half through the crust. She thrashed, foam flecking her mouth, eyes rolling white with terror. Emma dropped the lantern into the snow and crawled forward, arms out. "Easy, girl, I'm here." Her voice cracked but carried. She stripped off her coat, draped it across the mare's neck, and pressed her cheek to the trembling hide. "Breathe with me. Just breathe." She counted again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her lips stiff with cold. Juniper's chest heaved, erratic, then slowed fractionally to match. Behind her came other voices, muffled through the blizzard. Avery's cry, then the crunch of boots. Lyle appeared, rope slung across his shoulder, his hair crusted with snow. "Hold her steady," he shouted. Together they looped the rope around the mare's chest, heaving in rhythm with Emma's whispered counts. Each pull tore through Emma's arms, but slowly, painfully, Juniper's leg came free. She staggered, half collapsing into Emma's arms, steam rising from her body into the freezing air. For a moment, all Emma could do was bury her face in the horse's mane, sobbing from relief and exhaustion. The blizzard howled around them, uncaring, but inside that circle of warmth, girl, horse, rope, and hands, there was something fierce enough to fight it. Avery touched Emma's shoulder, eyes shining through the frost. "We've got to move. Storm's getting worse." They leaned into the wind, guiding Juniper step by step back toward the ranch. Each gust threatened to knock them sideways, but Emma clung to the rope, refusing to let go. She whispered the rhythm over and over, her voice hoarse. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each number became a vow, a promise stretched against the storm. By the time the barn loomed out of the snow, Emma's legs were numb, her hands raw and bloodless. But Juniper was still there beside her, limping but upright, head pressed against her shoulder like a tired child. Inside, lanterns blazed, men moving quickly to spread blankets, to rub the mare's body with burlap. Grant stood in the corner, his expression carved from stone. He said nothing, only watched as Emma pressed her forehead to Juniper's and whispered, "You're safe now." The storm rattled the barn walls, snow seeping through cracks, but Emma didn't hear it. All she knew was the sound of Juniper's breath, steady again, matching hers in the dark. The storm had blown itself out by dawn, leaving behind a silence so deep it seemed the whole valley was holding its breath. Snow blanketed the land in drifts that smoothed fences into faint lines and swallowed the pastures whole. The river lay crusted with ice, its edges glistening where the current had broken through. Emma stood by the barn doors, her arms wrapped tight around herself, watching the horizon bleed pink as the sun climbed. Her body still ached from the night before, but the ache inside, fear and fierce relief, was sharper. Juniper dozed in her stall, steam rising from her back beneath heavy wool blankets. Every so often, her ears flicked toward Emma's voice when she spoke softly, as if tethered to that sound now. The mare's limp was worse from the ordeal, but she was alive, and that alone felt like a miracle. Emma brushed her with long, deliberate strokes, the bristles whispering through the coat like wind through tall grass. "You held on," she whispered. "You let me find you." Grant entered without a word, his boots leaving prints in the fresh straw. He stood at the edge of the stall, arms folded, face shadowed. For a long moment he said nothing, only studied the mare and the girl beside her. Finally, he exhaled through his nose, as if conceding something invisible. "Don't mistake survival for strength," he said, his tone clipped. "A storm doesn't change what she is." Emma met his gaze, her hand still resting on Juniper's neck. "No, but it shows who she is." His eyes flickered at that, though he didn't answer. He turned and left, the barn door groaning shut behind him. Later that afternoon, Lyle arrived to check Juniper's leg. His truck rattled into the yard, carrying the smell of wood smoke and iron. He examined the tendon, fingers pressing with the certainty of long practice. "Swollen worse, but no tearing," he murmured. "She'll need rest, cold packs, short walks." His voice softened as he glanced at Emma. "You did right last night. Most would have panicked. You gave her something to follow." Emma felt her throat tighten. "I didn't know what else to do, but breathe." That was enough. Lyle straightened, brushing snow from his gloves. "Animals don't care about what you know. They care about how you are." The words stayed with her long after he left. She thought about how many people in her life had told her she wasn't enough. Too small. Too poor. Too dependent. And yet, with Juniper, her breath, her presence, her stubborn will to stay, had mattered. Maybe more than anything else. That night, as the wind softened and stars returned, Emma led Juniper slowly toward the river's edge, careful on the icy ground. The mare moved stiffly, but her head was high, nostrils catching the scents of snow and pine. They stopped where the slough had nearly claimed her, the ice fractured in jagged scars. Emma crouched and touched the frozen surface, feeling its bite against her fingertips. "This almost took you," she said softly. "But we're still here." Juniper lowered her head, exhaling a plume of breath that curled white into the night. Emma pressed her palm to the mare's muzzle, her other hand curled tight against her chest. The memory of that storm would never leave her, but neither would the memory of how Juniper had steadied when she asked her to breathe. For the first time since she'd arrived at Whitaker Ridge, Emma felt the sharp line between fear and belonging blur. She was no longer just an orphan girl doing chores in the shadows. She was someone who had fought through a storm with a creature everyone else had given up on. And won, as they turned back toward the barn. Emma whispered the rhythm again, her voice mingling with the crunch of snow. 1, 2, 3, 4. Juniper's steps fell into the cadence, imperfect but sure, as if the river's edge had become less a place of danger and more a marker of survival. The days after the blizzard carried a strange stillness. Snow muffled every sound, turning the valley into a white hush where even the cattle seemed subdued. Emma rose earlier than usual, lighting the lantern before the sky shifted from black to gray. Her arms ached from hauling water and stacking bales, but each time she glanced toward Juniper's stall, she found the strength to keep moving. The mare lifted her head when Emma entered, ears twitching as if listening for her voice. Micah appeared that morning, his small figure bundled in too many layers, boots too big for his feet. He rarely spoke to anyone on the ranch, preferring the safety of corners. But now he hovered near the stall, watching Juniper with wide eyes. Emma crouched to meet his gaze. "She's gentle," she whispered. "You want to try?" Micah hesitated, then stepped forward, his mittened hand trembling as he reached through the slats. Juniper sniffed once, twice, then lowered her head, letting the boy's hand brush her muzzle. Micah gasped, the sound fragile as glass breaking, and looked at Emma as though she had given him a secret. Later that day, when the chores were done, Micah returned with something clutched in his pocket. He pulled it out shyly, a string of old tin can lids, each one painted with a wash of blue, strung together with baling twine. "Made this," he murmured. "Wind chimes." Emma's throat tightened. She tied the little chimes to Juniper's stall, where the draft carried through the boards. The first time the wind stirred, the lids clinked together, not harsh but soft, like laughter half-remembered. Juniper flicked her ears, then leaned closer, breathing at the sound. That evening, when Grant passed through the barn, he paused, frowning at the odd decoration. "What's this?" he asked. "Micah made it," Emma said simply. She braced for disapproval, but Grant only studied the boy, then the horse, and walked on without a word. His silence felt heavier than any judgment. As night settled, Emma lingered by the stall, listening to the chimes. Each note seemed to carry a message. Fragile things can still make music. Juniper shifted, pressing her muzzle against Emma's shoulder, and the sound mingled with the rhythm of her breath. Emma whispered, "See? You're not afraid anymore." The mare blinked, calm, steady. For the first time, Emma felt the barn itself soften, as though the walls had absorbed a little hope. Outside, the valley lay under a silvered moon. Inside, the wind chimes sang faintly in the dark, marking not just survival, but the first signs of healing. The barn smelled of damp hay and iron when Emma carried the morning pails inside. Her breath clouded in the cold, swirling into shafts of light where dust floated like drifting snow. Juniper lifted her head as soon as she stepped into view, ears twitching at the sound of the tin wind chimes Micah had strung days earlier. Their gentle clinking had become part of the rhythm of the barn, as steady now as the creak of rafters. But Grant's footsteps broke that rhythm. He strode in with his coat collar pulled high, a folded letter in his hand. His face was unreadable, but the way he gripped the paper told Emma enough. She waited, heart quickening, as he unfolded it on the rail. "Bank wants payment by month's end," he said without preamble. "If it doesn't come, we'll have no choice but to cut stock." His eyes flicked toward Juniper, and the unspoken threat pressed hard between them. Emma swallowed. "She's stronger every day. You saw it. She isn't—" Grant cut her off. "Strength doesn't pay debt. I can't feed sentiment. The ranch lives or dies on numbers." Cal, never far from the scent of trouble, leaned against the doorway with a smirk. "Told you, boss. Mare's a liability. Might as well sell her for scrap before winter eats her whole." His voice oozed satisfaction, like someone already imagining the ledger balanced clean. Emma clenched her fists, heat rising despite the cold. "She's not a liability. You just don't want to see what she is." Grant's gaze sharpened. "What she is, girl, is another mouth to feed. Unless you can prove otherwise." He tapped the letter. And soon. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay on her cot, the wind rattling the bunkhouse walls, thinking of her mother's photograph folded safely in her pocket. Her mother had once told her that worth wasn't something measured in dollars, but in what you were willing to stand for when the world pushed you down. Now, as she stared into the dark, Emma knew her promise had narrowed into something sharper. It wasn't only about saving Juniper anymore. It was about proving that the measure of worth could be more than ink on a page. The next morning, Emma led Juniper out into the pale light. Snow still blanketed the pasture, but the mare stepped carefully, her limp less pronounced than it had been before the blizzard. Each stride left a print that Emma read like scripture. Progress etched in snow. Lyle met them at the fence, his toolbox in hand. He crouched to examine the leg again, his fingers pressing gently. "She's healing," he said at last. "Not perfect, not yet, but healing." Emma felt a surge of hope, so fierce it stung her eyes. She looked at Grant, who had followed at a distance, watching silently. "You asked for proof," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "Here it is." She's healing because someone believed she could. Grant didn't answer, only turned back toward the house, his boots crunching in the snow. But Emma noticed his shoulders weren't as rigid as before, and that tiny shift felt like a crack in stone. That evening, Micah sat cross-legged by Juniper's stall, humming softly while the mare dozed. The wind chimes clinked above, blending with the boy's thin voice. Emma watched from the doorway, her heart aching with a mixture of pride and dread. She knew the fight wasn't over. The ranch was still drowning in debt, and Cal's voice would always be ready with scorn. But in that fragile harmony, the boy, the mare, the chimes. Emma saw another kind of balance, one that numbers could never calculate. She whispered into the cold, "If they want to measure worth, let them start here." Juniper flicked an ear, as though she had heard, and breathed out slowly. The sound mingled with the chimes, soft and sure, like a promise Emma refused to let the world erase. The cold had settled deep into the valley, the kind that made fences groan and left breath hanging like smoke long after it was gone. Emma worked with numb fingers, hauling feed in silence, her mind still turning over Grant's words from the day before. Worth measured in dollars, in bank deadlines, in ledgers lined red. She wanted to shout that worth wasn't that small, but every time she faced him, her voice stuck, like ice in her throat. That evening, after the yard lights flicked on and most of the men had turned in, Emma passed the ranch house on her way back to the bunkhouse. She saw a figure sitting alone on the porch, shoulders hunched beneath a heavy coat. It was Avery, staring out at the snowy pasture as if it might answer her. Emma paused, then climbed the steps quietly. Avery gave a tired smile. "Can't sleep?" Emma shook her head. "You?" "Same." Avery exhaled, the sound clouding in the chill. "It's like there's a storm inside this house that never blows out." Emma hesitated, then pulled the folded photograph from her pocket, the one she'd carried for years, edges softened by touch. She handed it over. In the porch light, Avery studied the faded colors, a young woman smiling beside a horse, a toddler clinging to her skirt. "That's my mom," Emma whispered. "She worked here before I was born. She always said this ranch saved her once. That's why she came back every summer, even when we had nothing. She believed this place had a heart." Avery's eyes shimmered. She was right. Once. My father, he wasn't always like this. Her voice caught, then steadied. There was a time he'd sit out here and talk about horses like they were family. Then the droughts came and the loans and... She trailed off, clutching the photo as though it might warm her hands. Emma searched her face. "Do you think he remembers?" "Maybe," Avery said softly. "But he buries it under numbers. Like if he forgets the people, the pain won't sting so much." Inside, a light flicked on. Through the window, they saw Grant at the kitchen table, a glass of whiskey beside the open ledger. His face looked older, more tired, etched by something heavier than years. "He's breaking," Avery whispered. "But he'll never admit it." She handed the photo back, her fingers brushing Emma's. "Don't give up on him yet. Sometimes the cracks are where the truth slips out." Later, back in the barn, Emma sat by Juniper's stall, the wind chimes tinkling faintly overhead. She thought about Avery's words, about cracks and truths. The mare shifted, leaning her head over the slats until her muzzle pressed into Emma's hair. Emma closed her eyes, letting the warmth seep in. "You're the only proof I have left," she murmured. "Not just that you can heal, but that he can too." The barn settled into quiet. Snow tapped against the roof, soft as a heartbeat. Emma rested there until sleep took her, curled beside the horse that everyone else had called worthless. And in the silence, the ranch itself seemed to breathe, as though something inside its heart had stirred, waiting to be remembered. The valley thawed just enough for the roads to soften, and with that came the idea of a gathering. It was Lyle who suggested it, half serious, half hopeful, as he hammered a shoe into place on a gelding. "Neighbors'll come if there's music and stew," he said, glancing at Emma. "And maybe they'll leave behind more than just empty bowls." Word spread fast. The Whitaker barn had always been the largest in the valley, a place that once held dances after cattle drives and quilting bees when winters dragged on too long. Now, for the first time in years, lanterns were strung high along the rafters, their glow spilling through the wide doors into the snow-dusted yard. By evening, wagons and pickups rattled in, carrying families wrapped in wool coats, their breath clouds of laughter in the cold. Emma worked alongside Avery, ladling stew from an iron pot that hissed where the fire licked its sides. The smell of onions and beef mingled with pine smoke, and for the first time, the barn felt alive again. Children darted between hay bales, their boots clattering against the boards, while older ranchers leaned on rails, trading weather stories. Lyle tuned a battered guitar near the tack wall, plucking strings until a melody floated up, warm as cider. At first, Emma kept to the edges, watching with cautious eyes. She wasn't used to being part of something that hummed with belonging. But when Micah tugged her sleeve and pointed at Juniper's stall, where neighbors had gathered, murmuring at the mare's calm posture, she felt pride swell in her chest. The wind chimes above her stall rang faintly, and not one person mocked the sound. They listened. Grant arrived late, his silhouette filling the doorway. Conversation dipped when he entered, as though folks were unsure whether he'd bless or condemn the gathering. But he only stood near the back, arms crossed, his eyes scanning the barn filled with faces. Emma caught a flicker of surprise in him, as if he'd forgotten his ranch could still draw people not for debt, but for community. Lyle spoke up between songs. "We're here because no ranch stands alone. Winter's hard, feed's harder, but together, maybe we can keep one another standing." He set a jar on the table, coins already glinting inside. Avery followed with a quiet strength, thanking each neighbor who stepped forward, offering feed sacks, blankets, or a folded bill. Even those with little men gave what they could. Emma felt her throat tighten as she watched. It wasn't just about Juniper anymore. It was about a valley remembering what it meant to hold one another up. She found herself humming along with Lyle's guitar, her voice blending with others, thin at first, but steadier as the night grew. Later, when the stew was nearly gone and the music had softened, Emma slipped away to Juniper's stall. The mare lifted her head, eyes reflecting lantern light, calm amid the noise. Emma leaned close, whispering, "They see you now, not as a weight, but as hope." The mare exhaled, warm breath clouding between them, while the wind chimes sang faintly overhead. For the first time, Emma felt the balance shift, not just in her fight, but in the hearts of those around her. At the far end of the barn, Grant still stood apart, but Emma noticed his hands weren't clenched anymore. He was listening, if only in silence. And in that silence, something fragile cracked open. The kind of crack Avery had told her about, where truth might slip through, The morning after the barn gathering carried a strange quiet, as if the land itself was still digesting the warmth of lantern light, stew, and music. Emma woke to the sound of boots crunching outside the bunkhouse. When she stepped into the pale dawn, the valley was washed in silver. The snow hardened into a brittle crust that cracked beneath her feet. She found herself walking toward the house, though she hadn't been called. Something in the air tugged her forward, heavy and insistent. Grant was waiting on the porch, a folded paper in his hand. He looked older than he had the night before, the skin under his eyes shadowed, but there was a strange calm in his posture. Emma froze at the bottom step, unsure whether she should retreat. His voice came low, roughened like gravel. "Come here, girl." She climbed the steps slowly, her breath puffing white in front of her. He held the paper out, the edges smudged with the dirt of his hands. "This ranch can't afford sentiment," he began, and Emma braced herself for the blow. But his next words cracked something open inside her. "Still, it's yours now. The mare." Emma blinked, not understanding. "Mine?" He tapped the page. "Bill of sale, $1. That's all." Her heart lurched. She reached for the paper with trembling fingers, reading the scrawled lines that transferred ownership of Juniper from Whitaker Ridge to Emma Cole. A single coin lay atop the wooden rail, already tarnished, its weight absurdly small compared to the gift it carried. "Why?" she whispered. Grant's jaw tightened. He looked out over the frozen pasture, his breath curling into the cold. "Because you kept her alive when I would have let her go. Because you made a fool of me last night, standing there with the whole valley looking at that horse like she mattered. And because—" his voice faltered, then steadied. "Because my daughter says your mother once said this place saved her. Maybe she was right. Maybe it can save you too." Emma's eyes burned. She pressed the paper against her chest as if it might melt into her skin. "I'll never let you regret this." Grant turned away, brushing frost from the rail. "See that you don't." His voice carried no softness, but his shoulders weren't as rigid as before. When Emma returned to the barn, Juniper lifted her head, ears pricking as though she sensed the shift. Emma slipped into the stall, held the paper out for the mare to sniff. "You're mine now," she whispered. "No one can take you away." Juniper's warm breath swept over the page, and Emma laughed through the tears streaming down her face. Micah appeared quietly at her side, clutching the wind chimes he'd strung days earlier. "Does this mean she stays forever?" he asked, his eyes wide. Emma knelt beside him, holding the paper like a flag of fragile victory. "Yes, forever." The chimes stirred overhead, their clinking carrying through the barn, blending with the mare's steady breath. For the first time since she'd arrived at Whitaker Ridge, Emma felt the ground beneath her steady. She had fought for something, and won, not with power or money, but with patience, breath, and stubborn hope. That night, as the valley lay under stars, Emma unfolded the paper once more by lantern light. She traced her name written there in Grant's heavy hand and whispered it aloud, not to herself, but to her mother, wherever she might be. "We belong," she said. And in the quiet, Juniper leaned close, her muzzle brushing Emma's shoulder as though sealing the truth. The days after the paper changed hands felt different, though nothing in the valley looked any less harsh. Snow still lay in ridges against the fence lines, the cattle still bawled for hay, and debts still hovered like storm clouds. Yet Emma moved through her chores with a new fire inside her. Juniper was no longer borrowed hope. she was hers, truly hers. Every stroke of the brush, every careful walk across the yard felt like a vow renewed. But Grant did not soften completely. One morning, as Emma led Juniper out into the pale light for exercise, he stood at the fence, arms folded. His breath steamed in the brittle air. "A paper doesn't make a horse worth keeping," he said evenly. "You wanted her? Then prove she's more than a pet." Emma's heart thumped. "How?" "Cal's driving the herd to winter pasture this week," he said. "Snow's heavy, fences down. If that mare of yours can't hold her own out there, then all you've done is waste everyone's time." His tone was sharp, but beneath it lingered something else. A challenge, yes, but also a door opening. Cal's smirk told Emma he expected her to fail. "She won't last an hour in the back country," he muttered. Emma ignored him, pressing her hand to Juniper's neck. "We'll be ready." The morning of the drive broke under Sarmiso, a low sky, clouds sagging with the promise of more snow. Cowboys mounted, leather creaking, cattle lowing in restless waves. Emma swung into the saddle, the paper of ownership tucked safely inside her coat. Juniper shifted beneath her, muscles taut but steady, ears pricked forward. The limp was still there, faint but real, yet Emma felt the strength humming in her like a low song. They moved out across the frozen pasture, the herd spreading wide, steam rising from hundreds of backs. Emma kept Juniper at the edge, circling, pushing stragglers forward. Each whistle of wind cut her face raw, but she leaned low, whispering the rhythm that had become their tether. 1, 2, 3, 4. Juniper's stride matched, uneven but unbroken. The real test came at a narrow draw where snow had drifted high against a broken fence. A calf panicked, bolting toward the open gap. The herd stirred, the danger of a stampede twitching through their bodies. Cal shouted, spurring his horse, but Emma was closer. She pressed her heels, urging Juniper forward. The mare surged, ears back, her limp pronounced, but her will fierce. They cut across the calf's path just in time, circling it back to its mother. Snow sprayed under her hooves, the chimes on her saddle ringing faintly in the wind. Emma's throat burned with cold and exhilaration. She felt the eyes of the riders on her, and more importantly, she felt Juniper's pride, as if the horse herself knew what they had done. By dusk, the herd was safe in the winter pasture. Fences mended, cattle settled. The men dismounted, rubbing stiff legs, their breaths rising in tired clouds. Cal glared, but said nothing. Grant rode up slowly, his horse snorting steam. He studied Juniper for a long time, then Emma, his face unreadable. Finally, he gave a single nod. Not praise, not yet, but acknowledgement. Emma slid down from the saddle, legs trembling, and pressed her face into Juniper's mane. "You did it," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. The mare leaned into her, exhausted but steady. That night, back in the barn, the wind chimes sang faintly as Emma brushed the sweat from Juniper's coat. Micah appeared, holding a blanket too big for his small arms. Together they draped it over the mare's back. The boy's eyes shone with wonder. "She's like a real ranch horse now," he said. Emma smiled, her heart full. "She always was. We just had to show them." And as the barn quieted into night, Emma realized the test had been more than just for Juniper. It had been for her, too. Against doubt, against debt, against fear. She had proved that worth was measured in courage, not in flawless strides. The drive to the winter pasture had left everyone weary, yet Emma carried a quiet flame inside her. Juniper had not only held her ground, she had risen to the test. Each time Emma replayed the moment when the mare cut off the stray calf, her chest filled with pride so sharp it hurt. But victories on a ranch never linger long. The valley demanded new labors, and the cold pressed in deeper each day. Nights grew harsher. The wind cut across the fields, whistling through every crack in the barn. Emma slept near Juniper's stall, wrapped in a thin quilt, the tin wind chimes clinking overhead. The sound, once fragile, had become a comfort. Each note reminded her of Micah's trembling hand reaching out for the mare, of survival at the frozen river, of a herd steadied by one horse no one believed in. One evening, as Emma brushed Juniper by lantern light, Avery entered carrying a bundle. She laid it across the rail, a saddle blanket stitched in deep blue, the edges embroidered with simple stars. "It was my mother's," she said softly. "She gave it to me, but I think it belongs here now." Emma touched the fabric reverently. "Are you sure?" Avery nodded. "Juniper's carried more than weight. She's carried you, this family, maybe even my father. That blanket should rest on her back." Emma's throat tightened. She draped the blanket carefully, smoothing it along Juniper's spine. The mare flicked an ear, then shifted closer, her breath warm against Emma's cheek. Micah appeared a moment later, carrying another string of chimes. Smaller this time, made of polished copper washers. He tied them gently to the saddle horn. When the horse moved, the soft metallic song rose like a whisper of hope. Emma laughed quietly, tears catching in her voice. "She's dressed in music now." Grant's shadow fell across the doorway then, his frame filling the light. He said nothing at first, only watched the horse standing calm beneath her new blanket, the chimes trembling softly. His expression was unreadable, but there was no hardness in it. Finally, he spoke. "You've done what I didn't think possible." His voice was low, almost carried away by the wind. "That horse listens to you like you're the only voice she's ever known." Emma swallowed. "It isn't just me. She chose to trust again." Grant looked at her for a long time, then at his grandson sitting cross-legged by the stall. "Maybe that's what we all need." His words hung in the air, heavier than the storm clouds gathering in the distance. Later that night, Emma returned to her cot in the bunkhouse, but couldn't sleep. She thought of her mother, of the stories she used to tell about this valley. She thought of Grant's admission, Avery's gift, Micah's chimes. The ranch had been carved by numbers and debts, but beneath it all was something that couldn't be tallied. Love, stubborn and quiet. She slipped back to the barn, unable to resist. Juniper greeted her with a soft nicker, eyes reflecting lantern light. Emma pressed her forehead to the mare's, breathing the rhythm they had carried through storm and silence. 1, 2, 3, 4, she whispered, though now it felt less like a count and more like a prayer. The chimes rang faintly, blending with the mare's breath. In that moment, Emma knew she no longer fought just for survival or recognition. She was answering something deeper, the call of the heart that had bound her to this horse from the very first touch in the frost. And Juniper, steady and sure, answered back in silence. Winter loosened its grip slowly, as if reluctant to leave the valley it had held so long. Snow shrank into rivulets that cut silver threads through the pasture, and the smell of damp earth returned with each thawing day. The mountains still carried their crowns of ice, but the light felt warmer now, softened at the edges. Emma stood at the barn doors one evening, watching the horizon smolder gold as the sun dipped, her breath steady, her heart quieter than it had been in years. Juniper grazed in the paddock beyond, her gait still imperfect, but her steps confident, no longer hidden in the shadows of survival. The blue saddle blanket lay across the rail, the copper chimes tied at its horn, singing gently each time the wind stirred. Micah knelt nearby, carving shapes into the dirt with a stick, his laughter rising when Juniper nudged him playfully. Emma leaned against the post, letting the sight wash over her like a benediction. She pulled the folded bill of sale from her coat, the paper worn soft at its creases. Her name, written in Grant's blunt hand, still startled her each time she read it. She had expected ownership to feel like possession, but instead it felt like responsibility, an inheritance of hope. She pressed the page to her chest and whispered, "I won't waste it." Behind her, footsteps approached. Grant's shadow stretched long across the straw. He stood beside her, silent for a while, his gaze on the mare. His face was lined, weary, but not as closed as before. "She's proven me wrong," he said at last. "And so have you." His voice carried no grandeur, only truth. Emma looked up, eyes shining. She only needed someone to stay. Grant's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "So did I." He turned then, heading back toward the house, leaving Emma with words that warmed her more than the fading sun. When the sky deepened into indigo, Emma slipped into the paddock, letting Juniper's breath mingle with her own. She pressed her forehead to the mare's, their rhythm one last time. 1, 2, 3, 4. No storm chased them now. No debt threatened. No eyes doubted. Only the steady communion of two beings who had chosen to believe in each other. Emma returned to the bunkhouse later and wrote a letter by lantern glow, her handwriting careful, deliberate. She addressed it to her mother's old friends, those who had once known her in this valley. She wrote not about debts or cattle or the struggles of ranch life, but about a chestnut mare once thought worthless and a girl who had found herself by refusing to walk away. "The lame horse taught me how to stand," she ended, sealing the page with trembling hands. Outside, the valley lay hushed, the soft wind moved through the pasture, stirring the copper chimes into a soft chorus. Juniper lifted her head, ears flicking, and for a moment it sounded like the whole world was listening. Emma blew out the lantern, lay back on her cot, and smiled into the dark. Tomorrow would bring new chores, new trials. But tonight, the ranch breathed easy, its heart beating again in the quiet bond between a girl and her horse. And though no one would mark it in a ledger, that was enough. If this story touched your heart, let me know with the simplest comment. Just type 0 or 1 below. Sometimes even the smallest mark means, "I was here, I felt this too." Don't forget to subscribe, because there are more stories waiting. Tales of people and animals that will remind you that hope is never truly lost. Stay with me for the next journey.